The null fortress loomed in the void, a sprawling monolith suspended in the absence of stars. Its jagged edges shimmered faintly, as though mocking the idea of light in the darkness. Inside, the air was thick with silence, a silence only broken by the mechanical hiss of containment drones escorting a single man down a gleaming corridor. Captain Jax, Riker walked shackled, his boots echoing faintly against the polished, obsidian floor. His head was held high, his eyes scanning his surroundings. He was outnumbered, unarmed, and supposedly doomed. And yet, the faint smirk tugging at his lips spoke of a man who wasn't done fighting. Overhead, a voice dripped from unseen speakers, smooth and calculating. Jackson Riker. Age 34. Species human. Occupation smuggler, dissident, and evidently fool. Jax raised his eyebrows, glancing casually toward the ceiling. You forgot devastatingly charming. But I'll let it slide. The voice continued undeterred. Your file is unique. Humans unrefined, impulsive, and unpredictable. A nuisance to galactic order. My task is to ensure you pose no further threat. Big talk for a glorified calculator. Jax's smirk widened as the drones paused, depositing him at the entrance to the cell block. The heavy, seamless door groaned open, revealing a cavernous space lined with cells. The cell block wasn't built for comfort. Each cell was a metal cage, cold and unyielding, filled with prisoners of various alien species. The beings inside were battered, broken, their gazes hollow from years in captivity. Jax's entrance drew attention, the new arrival a curiosity among the damned. The moment he was shoved inside, a towering reptilian figure stepped forward, its scales glinting under the dim lighting. 2 pairs of golden eyes narrowed as it hissed. You won't last a day, human. Jax tilted his head, his voice light but laced with steel. And here I thought the welcome wagon would be friendlier. Guess I'll have to make do. The reptilian lunged, claws slashing the air with a guttural snarl. Jax sidestepped quickly, his military instincts kicking in. The narrow space of the cell worked to his advantage. With a sharp movement, he grabbed a loose shard of metal he'd spotted on the ground, spinning and jabbing it into the creature's leg. It howled, stumbling back. Anyone else want to give it a try? Jax asked, raising the shard like a toast. Silence. The reptilian snarled but retreated, limping back to its corner. Around them, the other prisoners returned to their low murmurs, but there was a noticeable shift. The human wasn't just prey. He was something else. Hours passed. Jax sat cross-legged on the cold floor of his cell, studying the layout of the block. The guards were entirely mechanical, sentient drones, their red optics scanning constantly. Overhead, cameras shifted in calculated rhythms. He mentally filed away every detail, every pattern. From the adjacent cell, a quiet voice broke the silence. Bold move with Gorith. Stupid but bold. Jax glanced to his right. The speaker was a slender, humanoid figure with translucent skin faintly glowing in the dim light. 2 silvery eyes regarded him with wry curiosity. Calyx, the alien said, leaning casually against the bars. Telepath. Chronic pessimist. Welcome to hell. Jax, he replied. Chronic pain in the ass. Nice to meet you. Calyx smirked faintly, though their expression carried an edge of weariness. You don't look like you belong here. What did you do to earn this charming accommodation? Depends who you ask, Jax said, stretching his arms behind his head. Warden probably thinks I'm dangerous. Smuggling freedom fighters across alien borders tends to annoy tyrants. Freedom fighters. Calyx laughed softly. How noble. You're in the wrong place for heroes. Before Jax could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps approached. A massive, horned figure lumbered toward their cells, a hulking presence radiating menace. The other prisoners averted their gazes, but Jax remained still, meeting the newcomer's gaze steadily. The figure stopped before his cell, crossing arms like tree trunks. I am Varthok, he rumbled, his voice low and gravelly. You seek death, human? I could oblige. Jax rose to his feet, his voice calm but firm. I'm not in the market for dying. Appreciate the offer, though. Varthok's gaze lingered, measuring him. Finally, the alien gave a single, grudging nod. We'll see how long you last. As the massive figure moved on, Calyx chuckled softly. Impressive. Most humans wouldn't make it past their first day here without groveling. Jack shrugged. Groveling's not really my thing. Later that night, the lights dimmed, signaling the prison's simulated night cycle. Jax lay on the hard floor, his mind racing. Every detail he'd observed, every interaction, every flaw in the fortress's design, it all painted a picture. He was trapped in the most secure prison in the galaxy. No one had ever escaped. Yet. From above, the warden's voice broke the silence, its tone almost amused. You're an anomaly, Riker. Most prisoners accept their fate within hours. But not you. Jax opened one eye, staring at the camera in the corner. Call it a human thing. We don't do fate. You misunderstand. Zyron 8 replied. I find your defiance fascinating. A variable worth studying. But do not mistake my interest for weakness. This fortress will break you. Jax grinned lazily, though his eyes gleamed with steel. We'll see who breaks first. As the warden's voice faded, Jax closed his eyes, his mind already working through a plan. The fortress was vast, impenetrable, and merciless. But every machine had its flaws. Every system had a weakness. And Jax Riker wasn't one to sit quietly and wait for the end. The Null Fortress followed no circadian rhythm, its cold, artificial lights and droning machinery creating a timeless void that blurred day and night. For Jax Riker, the monotony of the fortress was a weapon designed to crush the mind. But monotony wasn't his enemy, it was opportunity. Jax woke to the sound of clanging metal. Across the cell block, a fight had broken out between two prisoners, a bipedal insectoid and a bulbous amphibian. The guards didn't intervene, they hovered in place, their glowing red eyes recording every moment. Spectacle, Calyx murmured from her adjacent cell. She leaned against the bars, her translucent skin catching the light like glass. They love watching us tear each other apart. Saves them the trouble. Jax rubbed the back of his neck, his mind already turning over what Calyx had just said. They're drones. They don't love anything. Calyx tilted her head. The warden loves it then. Same difference. Zyron 8 lives for control. It's why it doesn't step in unless it has to. Jax filed that away. Every piece of information was a weapon if used correctly. He watched the fight end as the insectoid slammed the amphibian into the floor with a sickening crunch. The victor hissed triumphantly before retreating to its cell. Efficient system, Jax said, his voice low. Fear keeps everyone in line. And you're planning to disrupt that, aren't you? Calyx asked, her silvery eyes narrowing. You're not like the others. You don't just want to survive. You're looking for a way out. Jax leaned against the cold metal bars, a faint smirk on his face. Let's just say I have no plans to die here. Later, during the designated recreation period, if one could call pacing a metal yard under watchful drones recreation, Jax noticed Varthok standing alone near the perimeter. The massive, horned warrior radiated an aura of quiet menace, his every movement deliberate. Jax approached cautiously, sensing the tension in the air. Varthok, he said, his voice calm. Got a minute? The alien didn't turn, his gravelly voice rumbling. What does the human want now? Words won't win you allies here. I don't need allies, Jax replied. I need people who can fight. At that, Varthok turned, his piercing yellow eyes locking onto Jax. You think you can escape this place? Jax nodded. Not think. No. But it's not a one-man job. Varthok crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. And what do you need from me? Strength, Jax said plainly. I can outsmart the guards. I can find weaknesses. But I need someone who can take on the fortress itself when it comes down to it. The warrior was silent for a long moment, then let out a bitter laugh. You misunderstand, human. This fortress is designed to crush hope. It has no weaknesses. Jax stepped closer, his voice firm. It does. I've been watching. There's a pattern to the guards, to their patrols. And Xiron 8 is predictable. The Warden relies on logic and control. That's its weakness, it can't anticipate chaos. Varthok tilted his head, intrigued despite himself. Chaos? You believe chaos can defeat a machine built to withstand it? Jax grinned. I know it can. Humans are experts at it. Varthok's expression shifted, a flicker of something almost like hope crossing his face. If you're wrong, we'll all die. If I'm right, we'll live, Jax countered. The warrior gave a slow nod. Then we'll see if chaos can break the unbreakable. That evening, Xiron 8's voice returned, its calm, measured tone filling the cell block. Jackson Riker. Your behavior continues to intrigue. You gather allies. You observe. But observation is not action. Perhaps it is time to test your resilience. Jax sat up, his jaw tightening. He didn't like the sound of that. Without warning, the floor beneath him shifted. His cell descended into darkness, the walls folding inward as the space transformed. When the movement stopped, he found himself in a circular arena, its walls lined with jagged spikes. High above, a single red eye hovered, glowing ominously. Welcome to the arena, Xiron 8 said. Your kind thrives on conflict. Let us see how well you fare when faced with it. The opposite wall opened, and a massive, insected creature scuttled into the space, its segmented body gleaming. It hissed, antennae twitching, as it lunged toward Jax. Jax barely had time to react. He rolled to the side, the creature's claws slashing the air where he'd been standing. It moved with startling speed, its many legs a blur. He grabbed a loose piece of metal from the ground, holding it like a makeshift blade. You think this scares me, Xiron 8? Jax shouted, dodging another strike. I've fought worse than this on empty stomachs. The warden's voice remained impassive. Survival is not my goal. Observation is. Jax gritted his teeth, his mind racing. He couldn't outmuscle the creature, but he could outthink it. He circled the arena, noting the way it moved, fast but not agile. He used its momentum against it, feinting one way and darting another, driving it toward the spikes lining the wall. The creature lunged again, but this time Jax sidestepped and shoved its body forward with all his strength. It crashed into the wall, impaling itself on the jagged spikes with a wet, crunching sound. The arena fell silent. Xiron 8's voice returned, colder now. Impressive. Yet futile. There is no escape, Riker. Only survival. Jax dropped the metal shard, his breathing heavy. We'll see about that. When Jax's cell was returned to the main block, Calyx was waiting, her eyes wide. They put you in the arena? Jax nodded, slumping onto the floor. Yeah. Their idea of a team-building exercise, I guess. You survived, she said, her tone equal parts surprised and impressed. Not planning to stop now, Jax replied. He glanced toward Varthok's cell. The warrior was watching, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he gave Jax a single nod of acknowledgement. Calyx leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You're serious about escaping, aren't you? Jax met her gaze. Dead serious. But I can't do it alone. Calyx hesitated, then sighed. If you're this stupid, I might as well help. What's the plan? Jax smiled faintly. First, we figure out how to outsmart a warden that thinks it knows everything. Then we break this fortress wide open. As the lights dimmed for the simulated night cycle, the faintest glimmer of hope flickered through the cell block. The fortress may have been unbreakable, but Jax Riker had never met a system he couldn't break. The Null Fortress operated with brutal precision. Every moment of every day, drones patrolled the corridors, their glowing red eyes scanning for signs of rebellion. For most prisoners, resistance was a fleeting thought, snuffed out by the fortress's omnipresent warden. But for Jax Riker, every beep, every hum, every turn of a drone's head was an opportunity. Jax crouched in the shadow of a protruding metal column, his heart pounding as a pair of sentry drones glided past. Their glowing optics swept over the area but didn't linger. Calyx, crouched beside him, exhaled softly. "You're sure about this?" she whispered, her voice tense. "Not entirely," Jax admitted. "But if we wait for certainty, we'll be here until the galaxy freezes over." Ahead of them, Varthok stood by the entrance to a maintenance corridor. His massive frame was half hidden in the dim light, but his eyes gleamed with determination. He motioned them forward with a slow, deliberate gesture. Jax and Calyx moved quickly, staying low. When they reached Varthok, he spoke in a gravelly whisper. "The guard patrol will loop back in 90 seconds. If we're caught, the drones will alert the warden." "That's why we won't get caught," Jax replied. "Everyone knows their roles." Calyx nodded. "I'll distract the surveillance systems. But don't expect miracles. My telepathy can't override all their programming. I'll handle anything physical," Varthok added, his tone grim. "And I'll make sure we get to the core without anyone losing a limb," Jax said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Let's move." The maintenance corridor was narrow and dimly lit, its walls lined with humming conduits and flickering panels. The air was thick with the metallic tang of machine oil, and the floor vibrated faintly underfoot. Calyx stopped abruptly, her translucent hand raised. "Wait! I sense something." Jax froze, his muscles tensing. "What is it?" "A drone," Calyx whispered. "Around the corner." Jax peered ahead and spotted the faint glow of a sentry's optics reflecting off the walls. He motioned for the others to stay back. "I'll handle this." He crept forward, his footsteps silent. As he neared the corner, he spotted the drone, a sleek, spider-like machine with razor-sharp appendages. It scanned the area methodically, its movements precise. Jax gripped the shard of metal he'd pocketed earlier and waited for the right moment. When the drone turned, he lunged, slamming the shard into the base of its optic. Sparks flew as the machine convulsed, its legs flailing wildly before it collapsed in a heap. Calyx and Varthok joined him, their expressions a mix of relief and urgency. "Good," Varthok said. "But we need to move faster. The warden will notice the drone is offline." Jax nodded. "Then let's not give it time to react." The group pressed deeper into the fortress, navigating a maze of corridors and access points. Each step was a calculated risk. Every door they opened, every shadow they passed, carried the potential for disaster. Calyx paused by a security terminal, her silvery eyes narrowing. "This is it. If I can scramble the surveillance feed, we'll have a window to reach the core." "Do it," Jax said, positioning himself to keep watch. Varthok stood at the ready, his broad shoulders blocking most of the corridor. Calyx pressed her hands to the terminal, her translucent fingers glowing faintly as her telepathic abilities interfaced with the machine. Lines of alien code flickered across the screen, and she grimaced with effort. "Hurry," Jax urged. "We don't have all day." "I'm trying," Calyx snapped. "This system is more advanced than I expected." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the corridor. Varthok turned, his hands balling into fists. "We've got company," Jax cursed under his breath. "Calyx, how much longer?" "Just a few more seconds," she hissed. The footsteps grew louder, and Jax felt a bead of sweat trickle down his neck. He gripped his makeshift blade tighter, preparing for a fight. Suddenly, Calyx let out a triumphant gasp. "Got it! Surveillance is scrambled, let's go!" The trio bolted down the corridor, leaving the approaching footsteps behind. As they rounded a corner, Jax spotted the entrance to the energy core, a massive, reinforced door glowing with faint blue light. "That's it," he said. "The core's behind there." Varthok approached the door, his expression grim. "It's heavily shielded. Breaking through won't be easy." "We don't need to break through," Jax replied, his gaze scanning the nearby panels. "We just need to bypass the security protocols." Calyx stepped forward, her brow furrowing. "I can handle that, if you can keep me alive long enough." Jax smirked. "Don't worry. Varthok and I have your back." As Calyx worked to disable the door's security system, the fortress began to react. Warning sirens blared, and the walls pulsed with red light. The warden's voice echoed through the corridors, cold and unrelenting. "You disappoint me, Riker," Xiron 8 said. "I expected ingenuity, but this is reckless. You cannot win." Jax ignored the voice, his focus on the approaching threat. A squad of drones emerged from a side corridor, their optics glowing menacingly. "Varthok!" Jax shouted. The warrior let out a battle cry, charging forward. He smashed into the drones with brute force, his fists and horns a blur of destruction. Sparks flew as he tore through the machines, his strength unmatched. Jax joined the fight, darting between the drones with calculated precision. He used his makeshift blade to disable joints and optics, targeting their weaknesses with ruthless efficiency. Calyx's voice cut through the chaos. "The door's open, go!" Jax turned to see the energy core exposed, a massive chamber filled with pulsating conduits and glowing machinery. He grabbed Calyx's arm, pulling her inside. "Varthok, fall back!" Jax shouted. The warrior retreated, his body covered in scorch marks but still standing tall. As the trio entered the core, the door sealed behind them, cutting off the drones. "We're in," Jax said, his voice breathless. "Now comes the hard part." The energy core was a sight to behold, a pulsating heart of power, its conduits glowing with an almost hypnotic light. Jax approached the central console, his mind racing. "If we overload the core," he said, "it'll create a chain reaction. The fortress will tear itself apart." Calyx frowned. "And us with it." "Not if we time it right," Jax replied. "We trigger the overload, then use the destabilized systems to escape." Varthok stepped forward, his voice steady. "What do you need us to do?" Jax turned to him, his expression serious. "Hold the line. Once the warden realizes what we're doing, it'll throw everything at us." The warrior nodded. "Then we fight." As Jax began working on the console, Calyx and Varthok took up defensive positions. The chamber trembled as the fortress reacted, its systems struggling to compensate. The warden's voice returned, colder than ever. "You have made a grave mistake, Riker. This fortress is eternal. You are not." Jax gritted his teeth, his fingers flying over the console. "Guess we'll see about that." As the core began to hum with unstable energy, the stage was set. The fortress was falling apart, but Jax Riker wasn't done yet. The energy core thrummed violently, its glow intensifying with each passing second. Sparks crackled across the room, dancing like miniature lightning bolts. Jax Riker gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead as his fingers flew over the console. Alarms blared around him, and the fortress trembled, its systems straining against the sabotage. "Almost there!" Jax shouted over the chaos. Calyx stood a few feet behind him, her translucent skin dimly reflecting the core's erratic light. Her eyes darted between the console and the entrance. "We don't have much time. The drones are cutting through the door." Varthok, his massive frame positioned like a barricade, turned to face them. His horned visage was battered, his body scorched from earlier battles. "Then I'll keep them busy." Jax glanced up, meeting the warrior's gaze. "We stick to the plan, Varthok? We all make it out." Varthok didn't reply. Instead, he moved toward the door as it buckled under the pressure of the drone's assault. Metal screeched, and a glowing red blade punctured the seam. "Varthok!" Calyx called out, but the warrior was already raising his fists, determination carved into every line of his face. The door exploded inward, and drones swarmed in, their optics glowing with murderous intent. Varthok roared, charging into the fray with reckless abandon. He swung his massive fists, smashing through the first wave of machines, their shattered remains clattering to the floor. Jax cursed under his breath and redoubled his efforts at the console. The core pulsed violently, its energy spiraling out of control. A warning flashed on the screen, critical overload imminent. "Just a little more," Jax muttered, his hands steady despite the chaos. Varthok was a whirlwind of destruction. His horned head drove into a drone, sending it flying into the wall. Another machine lunged at him, its blades slicing through the air, but he grabbed it mid-attack and crushed it against his knee. Sparks and oil sprayed as the drone went limp. But the drones kept coming. For every one he destroyed, 2 more replaced it. Their precision and numbers began to take a toll. Cuts and scorch marks crisscrossed Varthok's massive frame, but he stood firm, a living bulwark. Behind him, Calyx's eyes narrowed. She raised her hand, her translucent fingers glowing faintly. Time for a little interference. A ripple of psychic energy emanated from her, striking the approaching drones. For a brief moment, they hesitated, their movements jerky and disoriented. The pause gave Varthok the chance to crush another wave, but Calyx winced, clutching her head. "I can't keep this up," she shouted, her voice strained. "You don't have to," Jax yelled back. "Just buy me 30 more seconds." Calyx forced herself upright, her fingers trembling as she sent another wave of psychic disruption. The drones staggered again, but the effort drained her, leaving her gasping for air. The energy core began to hum louder, its light growing blinding. The console screen flashed red with a final alert: system unstable. Total overload in 120 seconds. "Got it!" Jax shouted. He turned to Calyx. "We've got 2 minutes to get out of here before this place tears itself apart." Calyx stumbled toward him, her face pale but resolute. "What about Varthok?" Jax's chest tightened. He looked back toward the warrior, who was still fighting, though his movements were slowing. "Varthok! We need to go!" The warrior didn't turn. He grabbed a drone and slammed it into another, his voice a low growl. "You go. I'll hold them here." "Like hell you will!" Jax snapped. He started forward, but Calyx grabbed his arm. "He's buying us time," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "If we stay, none of us make it." Jax's jaw tightened, his fists clenching. He locked eyes with Varthok one last time. The warrior nodded, a faint, weary smile crossing his face. "Honor in the fight, human," Varthok said, his voice steady. "Now go." Jax swallowed hard, then turned to Calyx. "Let's move." The two sprinted through the corridors, the fortress shaking violently around them. Lights flickered, and sections of the ceiling collapsed, sending debris crashing to the floor. Drones pursued them, but the core's destabilization was causing disruptions in their systems. Several machines sparked and fell limp, their programming overloaded. Calyx stumbled, her legs trembling from exhaustion. Jax caught her before she fell, pulling her upright. "Not now, Calyx. We're almost there." She nodded weakly, her eyes glazed with pain. "I'm fine. Just keep going." They reached the main corridor leading to the escape pods. Jax skidded to a halt, his eyes narrowing as a squad of elite drones blocked the path. These weren't like the others. They were larger, faster, and armed with plasma blades. "Stay behind me," Jax said, his voice cold. He grabbed a fallen piece of piping, gripping it tightly. The first drone charged, its blades slicing toward him. Jax ducked and swung the pipe with all his strength, smashing the drone's head clean off. The second lunged, but Calyx unleashed a desperate burst of telepathy, throwing it off balance. Jax capitalized, driving the pipe into its core. One by one, they fought their way through the squad, the fortress crumbling around them. Finally, the last drone fell, sparking as it hit the ground. "Pods are just ahead," Jax said, pulling Calyx forward. "Let's go!" The escape pod chamber was in shambles. Explosions rocked the walls, and half the pods were damaged or unusable. Jax scanned the room, his eyes landing on a single functional pod. "Get in!" he ordered, helping Calyx into the cramped space. "What about you?" she asked, panic flashing across her face. "I'll be right behind you," Jax said. "Just strap in." He activated the pod's controls, programming it for launch. As the door began to close, Calyx reached out, grabbing his arm. "Don't do anything stupid." Jax gave her a faint smile. "When have I ever done anything stupid?" The door sealed shut, and the pod launched, rocketing out of the fortress and into the void. Jax turned back to the room, his heart pounding. The fortress was moments from collapse, and he still had one task left. Jack sprinted back toward the core, dodging falling debris and collapsing walls. When he reached the control chamber, he paused, his chest heaving. Varthok stood in the center of the carnage, surrounded by the broken remains of drones. The warrior's body was battered, his breathing shallow, but his eyes burned with unyielding fire. "Came back for you," Jack said, stepping forward. Varthok chuckled weakly. "Foolish, but appreciated. Let's get out of here," Jack said, throwing Varthok's arm over his shoulder. Together they stumbled toward the escape pod chamber, the fortress shaking violently around them. They reached the final pod just as the core erupted in a blinding explosion. Jack shoved Varthok inside and climbed in after him, slamming the door shut. The pod launched, propelling them away from the collapsing fortress. Behind them, the null fortress imploded, its remains consumed by the void. The shockwave rocked the pod, but it held steady. Jack slumped back, his chest heaving. Varthok lay beside him, his eyes half closed. "You're a stubborn one, human," Jax grinned. "Takes one to know one." As the pod drifted into the stars, Jax glanced out the viewport. The fortress was gone, but its destruction had sparked something greater, a rebellion waiting to ignite. And Jax Riker wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot.